Hello everyone, welcome to this video. My name is Sharon Milne Barber and I run Bengal Rose Healing and Quantum Trance Healing. I've come to do this video to try and help people who've gone through the journey of grief and bring an understanding of what grief actually is. I've had a journey of life that has brought grief to me in many ways, but it wasn't until March this year, 2025, I actually really started to understand what grief is, and this is in my 64th year of life. Grief to me has always been associated with people dying, and having been a light worker channeler or a medium, my work was associated a lot with death and around bringing messages of love and healing to those that needed them. And I hadn't really, out of my own perspective, thought much beyond that. I've written about trauma. I've written about how to heal from trauma. And then on February the 28th, my husband had a catalytic accident, which he broke an ankle and broke a knee and laid in the freezing cold for 5 hours while we waited for an ambulance, and finally got to a hospital the early hours of March the 1st, where the care was instant from then on for him to help him get better. We then experienced, he experienced a pulmonary embolism where he died, and the team of the NHS fought to bring him back 3 times and they were successful. And he then started his journey through ICU, kidney help at the Cardiff Hospital, and then back here again to the Caran Hospital for his recovery and rehabilitation. Then on June the 6th, he came home, not been able to hardly stand or walk, and has carried on his journey. And now today, and this is, what's it today, July the 30th, he has just managed to walk out the back gate and around on his crutches and back with the help of the physio, and he's using the choice of wheelchair and Zimmer. Mental health has been difficult, and obviously physically the body is slowly recovering. So that has been the journey. Now, what started to come out in that early journey with him being so ill, I started to realise grief wasn't associated with death anymore. Grief was associated with how it can, an event, and a catalyst event can change your life, how it can change your direction, your dreams, your hopes. And it is anything from being abused, losing yourself, losing who you were. You hear of narcissism, indoctrination in relationships, of the person that's dominating the other person, the person that's being dominated will lose who they are. Grief through animal loss, grief through materialistic loss, grief through job loss, grief through addiction. And in the early stages of my trying to live with what was happening around me, while Chris was laying in ICU fighting for his life, trying to support the family, friends, keeping everybody updated, and dealing with my own trauma, my own understanding of it all, through support, help and advice from NHS team through to friends and family, I began to get a greater understanding. And then my guides kicked in again once I started to reignite and started to realise that the traumas Chris had suffered, that he would most likely then survive after a few days of fighting for his life. So I began to get a bit lighter again, and my guides came to me and they said, you need to journal. I kept diaries years ago, and they actually have helped me through my life to change my perspective, which is yet another story again, and that's in my book, A Ginger Hair Girl with Freckles. And the journaling started to help me put down my feelings. I'd write the date and what I'd experienced, what was happening around me, how I felt. And my guide said to me, you're going to write a book about this and you're going to start now. Well, I was in a dark place. I just thought, how can this turn into a book? I don't understand. And I've written 17 books, so I should have understood. And they said, just carry on writing your thoughts down and it will grow. So with everything that was happening, I started to collate this book. And with all my books, I say to them, what is it called? And they give me the title, Grief Walks Beside You. It's probably backwards, but that was going to be the title of the book. And I said, oh, Grief Walks Beside You, okay. And again, not really having much understanding. And then they said to me, start exploring about grief across the internet, start reading about it. So I started to explore and collate together information about how to cope with grief, the different facets of grief, how it affects adults, children, people on addiction, people who have lost materialistic things. So we mean like that. So remember the big fires in Los Angeles, so many homes were destroyed with all their possessions. And they had to run to save their lives. That is a catalyst event. That is loss of memories, past. And you have to recover from that. Some call it trauma. But all of these events through our lives have ignited trauma within us. Now the book explains the different types of grief. Now it's been defined into about 7 of those. You can't really define it. You can't define grief. It's really hard to define. But for the 3D mind, we have to bracket things, if that makes sense. So this is what the book tries to do. It tries to give you some different layers of grief so that you can relate to it. So one of them was about being, which I related to when I started to study it, was the grief when somebody's still alive, but you're anticipating they're going to die and you prepare yourself for it. So that was probably the first week when Chris was in the ICU, because he was critical for quite a few days. And they said at any time something could happen. So I had to go through that trauma. And then you move on to the next phase and the next phase, and then the hope starts to come in. But then there's also that conversation, well, actually, he's not too good today. And it just keeps going and going and going. And the trauma of that sits within you and you start to relate to it. Now, how you cope with grief is all individual. But having a book like this just gives you some guidance to the different ways you can cope. And we're all different. Some people can't express grief because of their religious background, or male, or men especially. Now, my father was in the Second World War. He saw fighting, loss of life, lost his brother. He came out of that war. He had no therapy. He had no treatment for his trauma of what he witnessed. And the years ahead, when I tried to talk to him about it, he'd just have a tear in his eye and he couldn't talk. Now, when he passed away, I said to my older brother, or my younger brother actually, I said, did Dad ever speak to you? And Duncan said no, my younger brother. My older brother Bruce said, yes, once. And he said, I'm never going to talk about it again. So he kept all of that within him. And it was old school, proud, the way he'd been brought up. Men don't cry. But in today's world, we are now allowed to show our emotions, if that makes sense. But there's still some religions, the way you've been brought up, that might not allow you to do so. You might be in a job that's high-ranking job, and you lose someone close to you, but you can't walk into the office and have a cry, because you're running that office, you're running that department, you're running that business. So people hold grief in for different reasons. When there is a catalytic so say you've lived your life up to the age of 40, and you've perhaps had some trauma, you could have had some been abused as a child, you might have lost a childhood friendship, you might have somebody died really important to you when you were young, a teenage loss, a suicide around you, and you've tried to deal with it and it's been put away, not really dealt with. when there's a catalyst event in the future, she could be there's been human loss, materialistic loss. But imagine you've got a dog you're really fond of, and that dog suddenly dies out of the blue. That could be your catalyst event for all of that trauma to come up like a volcano and come out at that time. And people think, oh my God, that person's really upset over losing this dog. But actually, you're dealing with all the shit that's gone before. So you see what I mean? And the other thing I've discovered in this journey, so I should try not to get upset when I talk about all this, but I can't guarantee I won't, by the way. So when it all started, he obviously had his accident, Chris, and then he was 13 days in hospital waiting to have a third operation. And I'd gone out of the ward and the alarms went off on the ward, and I knew that meant that somebody was in trouble because we'd been in there long enough and experienced a couple of them. So when I went back on the ward to walk down the long corridor down to where his bay was, right at the bottom, and I saw a nurse shake their head at me and say, go back. I thought she just meant no one was allowed down there. So I kept walking, and she said no, and took my arm and said, it's your husband. And that was like, oh my God, and the feeling and the fear. And they said that his heart had stopped and they were what they were doing as I walked back up the corridor. And I actually went into shock. And what's been happening to me, and it happened to me at tea the other day, completely out of the blue. We've had a rough ride on and off in the last couple of weeks with different things going on health-wise for Chris and perhaps my own mental health. I was sitting there, I was watching the Euro, they'd won the Euro and I was watching the news. I was having my tea, and no word of a lie, all of a sudden, the image of that came up out of my, I could feel it come out of me into my mind. And I was walking back down that tunnel in the middle of all this, and I just felt myself get really emotional again. And all of a sudden, this just comes as flashes back. And it can be out of the blue, you can be out shopping, you're sitting on the loo, wherever. And so you deal with the trauma of grief. It has no bounds. It's not a linear timeline. It is waves in a circle of energy that sits within you. And all of a sudden there's a little gap in that and it just comes up and has to be dealt with. Now I actually suppressed that. I should have let that out. I should have had a good cry. But I have had some good cries and I still have good cries. But what we're finding now is we can talk about it more without getting emotional. And we had no idea how this was going to affect us from a day-to-day basis. Now Chris doesn't remember a lot of, he lost probably 5 or 6 weeks of his life. So prior to the pulmonary embolism, he doesn't remember much of that hospital stay. He lost 3 weeks, and when he was in the next hospital, he doesn't remember an awful lot of that. And it wasn't until he got back to the hospital in Brown that his recall started to really kick in, and he remembers a lot of that. So he lost 5 to 6 weeks of his life, everything that was going on around him. But it's in him, it's in his subconscious, it's recorded in there. Even in a coma, he would have heard and listened to things. So it's just having that understanding, even though he says, well, I don't remember any of this, he's still got that trauma in him. And I'm sure you won't mind me saying last week, that came up to the surface like a bloody massive volcano. And it erupted. And it was a very hard few days, but we've got through it. We've come through the other side. But you have to go with it. You can't suppress that. You've got to let that out. Because if you don't suppress that, that's going to eat away and gnaw at you inside. And we're talking about grief of what he's lost. He's starting to walk more. He's lost a lot of things through what's happened to him. And his independence and stuff like that. So, and we all hope that he will get that back. Well, we're not guaranteed at the moment. We don't know what the outcome is. We just got to go down this road and travel it with the help and support we're getting. So grief can be over tiny little things like breaking that favourite item your grandmother gave you, to losing a loved one through death. it's quite a wide spectrum and faceted. I just know that when you go through it, whatever it is, it's also made me recall events in my childhood. It's made me think how my spiritual journey has altered my thought on death, because obviously I completely trust that we all go somewhere else. Also, with all of this, which is actually in this book, Grief Walks Beside You, while I travelled that journey of him in ICU and before and beyond, I was talking to his ethereal self. So he was communicating me while his body was laying unconscious. Now, I've heard of this happening a lot, and I also know someone else that managed to connect with him in that time, and he said he was going to stay here and wasn't going to go. And you get that comfort from that, because you're being told at any moment something could go wrong, and because that was their understanding as doctors and nurses. Because they said that the consultant one night when this is when he was unconscious, I think it was about the 5th night in, I think I stayed because he'd had a bad day, just in case. And he came up and put his arm around me and said, "It's a miracle he's here." And he said, I've seen this 10 times, and your husband's the 10th person that survived this in all my years. And I realised then that he's here because surely he's got to come out of this. What are the lessons that are being learned with this? Why is he fighting for his life? Why hasn't he died? Because he wants to stay. There's a greater purpose. And that's what you have to trust for any grief, anything that happens to you, breaking that favourite piece of china your mother gave you, to the death of someone close. There's a spiritual learning path for this, and there's a purpose why all these things happen. And we go through grief because we love. We love that item because it was connected to grandma. We love that person laying there dying. We love the person who's passed, and grief comes from pure love. And it also comes from the loss of that physical presence that we don't have anymore, that we hold on to as humans. And then we have to learn not to have that physical presence anymore, but trust that love from that person who gave it to us, or that life that's now gone, is out there somewhere looking down on us and looking after us. And that might depend on your religion. You know, I won't go into that now, but religions have different aspects on this, don't they? But every human in this world will suffer with grief. Even somebody who's accidentally squashed a bee or a cricket or whatever, a grasshopper, they could feel upset because they did it. That is grief. So, you know, grief is many layers, many facets, and it's hard to put it into a book. And my guides actually say this in here somewhere, that, you know, so let me read this to you. This is what they gave me. Oh, sorry, this is what they gave me. Let me just find the page. It's all stuck together. It's probably new books, isn't it? Oh, there we go. Right. I'll just read this out to you. See if this helps you. Grief is not a chapter we close. It is a story that rewrites us, word by word, layer by layer. This book is not a guide to getting over loss, because love that deep never truly leaves. Instead, it is an invitation to walk alongside grief, to sit with the silence, to feel the weight of absence, and to honour your inner spirit's quiet unravelling. Here, grief is explored, not as something to fix, but as a sacred part of the human story. It is personal, spiritual, painful, and profound. A journey shaped by memories, heart, and love. It does not follow neat edges or timelines. It rises in waves, returns in whispers, and reveals who we are beneath the surface of who we were. This book is for anyone whose hearts and lives have been broken, opened by loss, who has stood in the hollow place between what was and what will never be. Through reflections, personal moments, and soulful insights, it offers not answers, but presence. not closure, but connection. It is a companion for the layered, spiralling, deeply human path through grief, one that honours the pain while gently making room for healing, meaning, and love that never ends. That's what my guides wrote to go in the beginning of the book. It just brought something to me while I was reading that. I was, sometimes I have the television on when I'm on my computer down low, and just as a background noise, or I don't know why, sometimes it makes me feel there's people around me. And I was in the kitchen doing some bits and pieces, and the news had come on, and I thought, I'll just flick it up, see what's happening in the world. And there was this young man standing there, and he'd gone to the university of his brother to collect his diploma or his degree. And his brother had passed, and it was his older brother, and his mum and dad couldn't face going, so his godmother had gone. And I looked at that young man, I thought, wow, what a brave thing to do. And he's dealing with all of that grief, and he's taken this massive responsibility on his shoulders. But what I noticed, which threw me a bit, they were saying, oh, of course, you'll be walking in your brother's shoes, you'll be doing this, you'll be doing that, and you're now going to university like your brother. And they were talking like he's going to be living his brother's life. But what came to me, and my guide said to me, you can't, like, that young man is taking on the burden of his loss of his brother. He's got to deal with his own grief, all his families and everybody around him. He's very brave, but he will not follow his brother's shoes. He will walk in his own shoes, and his brother will walk beside him. And I thought, wow. And then eventually, I think it was the godmother who said, because it was the presenter said about walking in your brother's shoes, following your brother's footsteps. And it was all about his brother, and this poor young lad was not really being seen for who he was. And the presenter had said this, and then the godmother said, of course, you will walk in your own shoes. And I thought, yes, this is really key. When people grieve for other people and take on the mantle of that grief, to do what that young man did that day, which is very brave and probably helped him with his healing and his journey forward. He has to walk in his own shoes. The grief of those that you've loved, or the materialistic things you lost, or the future you've lost, will walk beside you, because you will find a new path. There's a new path laid out. Now, in my work over the years, I've ran workshops, sat in workshops when I was learning, written books, all of this that I've done. Nearly everybody who's had an enlightening moment that's sent them to me or me to them is because you've had a traumatic experience in your life, or a catalyst event, which could be a death or some trauma of abuse or whatever. And it's through it you've seen the light, that there's something better, there's something out there. And you start to try and find that light and make it brighter through the spiritual connection. Mind fairs, mediums, light workers, healers, whoever you're drawn to go to. And I think nearly every person working like I do has, off the back of a traumatic event, seen the light and moved into this field. So the catalyst events and the trauma that we experience and the grief we experience is here to help us draw humanity to the light. And there will be a time in the future, and it won't be my generation or probably the next generation, but this is what our guides are aiming for, that humanity will not need to, there'll still be death of humanity. We will see death in a different way, in a more spiritual, highly ascended way. Grieving won't be so intense because we'll understand fully where they're going and be able to talk to them, communicate with them. And we will not need the catalysts and the trauma events anymore, because we would have descended above that. And we will have a greater understanding of an ascended human race and be welcomed into the universal cosmos of beings that help look after other beings and give us the light. So that is where humanity is going with all of this. So I should go back to my book quickly. Grief Walks Beside You. There's different sections in it, and there's human stories, their own people very kindly given their own very personal story. There's human stories connected with loss of pets, how to cope with grief, the holistic side of grief, the science side of grief, the quantum side of grief. Life after death, about guides, souls, dimensions, everything. There's everything in there that brings a greater understanding to what I've been talking about today. And you remember at the beginning, if you've watched it all the way through, you remember I mentioned the word journaling. That's how I started this book. I've actually now created a companion journal to go with the book. It has that quote on at the beginning that I read out to you. And then there's lines, it's like a lined notebook. And it's just for you to write your thoughts, how you're feeling. You'll be surprised in like a year's time. You'd have to write in every day. You can write, you know, how you feel. It could be, I don't know, it could be one word a day. And as you travel through the book over time, you'll start to see how you've grown and changed. And if you've got anger one day, write it. Write it down if you're happy one day. And you've then forgotten about the grief, and the guilt then comes in because you didn't remember. You think, well, that's part of healing. And it's all about moving on. Whatever you've lost walks beside you. It's a touch away, it's there, the ethereal essence of it, even materialistic objects, it's all there. And it's remembering that. And if you've lost a partner through death and you meet somebody in a year or 2 years time and you feel love again, that love was destined for you. It's part of your journey. Then there mustn't be a guilt around love. How can you have love and have guilt with it? You're not going to have a happy time, are you? So just take time to consider what grief actually is. It's not death. It's all different things in life. It's just there to be understood and embraced. And I just hope that what I've said today and this book will help many people. Now I should add that this is a non-profit making venture. Both of these books, any profit on top will go out to charities, which are in the back of the actual book, Grief Walks Beside You, where they will go. And every month I shall put up on my Bengal Rose Healing page what I send it to and who it goes to. So I hope this helps you. Go and buy the book. If you know somebody who's grieving, buy it for them. It's going to help them, and it's going to help somebody through a charity and support the world out there. Thank you very much for listening today. And if you're grieving, I send you love, light, and my guides send you lots of love as well. Bye.